Hey class, this is Andrew Templeton, and we're already in week 3. It goes so quick, these 8-week increments, but I hope things are going smoothly for you. However I can serve you, I'm here for you. I want to touch on 2 topics real briefly that you're going to begin to encounter. The first is the topic of covenant. You're going to see this throughout all of the Pentateuch, is really God establishing His covenant with His people. And you know, when you're looking at this idea, Hebrews, although it's not part of the Pentateuch, really gives some great detail about what covenant is. And it gives a lot of attention to covenant theology. It's something worth studying. It's worth reading and taking deeper, because you have covenant with Adam. You have a covenant with Abraham, covenant with Noah. There's going to be a covenant indirectly with Moses and the people of Israel as they go through their wilderness. But when you're dealing with this principle of covenant, a few things that Hebrews discusses is you're going to have bloodshed. This represents the permanency. You can read about this in Colossians 2:11. There's going to be a name change. It represents a change in identity according to John 14:13 and 14. The easy one on that is going from Abram to Abraham, from Sarai to Sarah. You're going to have an outward sign. This represents the seal, according to Genesis 9. I think rainbow is a simple one. God established the rainbow to show that He would not destroy this earth again by flood. Most of us, at some point in our life, we get married and we put on a wedding ring. This is an outward sign of a covenant that I have with my wife. It's something that I can show. Then the fourth part is a meal. Communion is a great one to look at, that covenant with God where we're going to break bread together. And then the fifth is an exchange of everything. Not just a little gift here and there, but you know, when I got married, it was an exchange of everything that I am, everything that I was, everything I hope to be, everything I owned, we would share. And the same came from my wife, and that's how it is with God. That's the key with covenant. God gave us everything. God gave us righteousness. God took our punishment. And so covenant's a key principle. In the Old Covenant, it's external. The change with Jesus, though, is it becomes internal. In the Old Covenant, there was a master involved. The New Covenant, God becomes our Father. In the Old Covenant, there's guilt. In the New Covenant, there's cleansing. Covenant is a key principle of the entire Pentateuch. The second thing I want to share with you very briefly is a question that I get every single semester, and that regards authorship of the Pentateuch. Tradition says Moses. Great, we all believe it. We know the Bible is inspired by God. It's living, it's active, it's sharper than any two-edged sword. We know there's over 40 different men and women that God used to put together what we call the 66 books of the canon, the Old Testament and the New Testament. And we always attribute the first 5 books to Moses. Are we right to do that? You're probably in your reading now and starting to scratch your head, questioning everything you knew about the Bible as you read about these 4 letters, J-E-D-P. I'll be honest, you can read different books on it. There's so much material, and it can get a little confusing. So I want to just give you a brief synopsis of what the J-E-D-P theory is all about. This theory suggests that the first 5 books were not entirely written by Moses, that he he put together some of it in the 1400s, and then later on during this time of Ezra, these different scribes put together the rest. The reason they question that Moses wrote everything is because there's different styles in writing. There's different names for God specifically. For instance, in Genesis chapter 1, you get the word Elohim for God. They believe, you know, that's a key principle. Or I'm sorry, the Jehovah name for God, and which means Elohim. And so then you have in the priestly material, you have an own style. And then in Genesis chapter 2, you have a different name. They say the word Yahweh. So you have Elohim in chapter 1, Yahweh in chapter 2. So they say this is one author, this is another author. Then you have Leviticus. It's a whole different writing style. Then you have Deuteronomy, a completely different writing style. And so they go through all this and say this was all a bunch of scribes working with Ezra in the 4th century BC, and they put the manuscripts together that we have together. J-E, Jehovah, Elohimist, D for Deuteronomist, P for the priestly material, which is Leviticus. And so I understand where they're coming from. More than likely, some people help put together the canon the way it is. But me personally, I attribute Moses to authorship. Let me give you an example why. Moses uses God's name to make a point. In Genesis chapter 1, he uses the name Elohim, which literally means mighty creator. It's the mighty God. In chapter 2, he's talking more about the creation of humankind. So he uses the word Yahweh, which is the personal God who creates and relates to humanity. It doesn't point to different authors, but a single author talking about God in different terminology. In other books, he's going to use different writing style, just like you and I would. If we're going to write a fiction book, we're going to write a certain style. If we're going to write for an academic journal, we're going to use a certain style. If we're going to write a love letter to our spouse, we're going to write with a different style. That's what Moses did here. So you have these different styles, you had different settings, but then you go to the New Testament. You know, the New Testament will always confirm the Old Testament, and it reveals the truth. And in Mark chapter 12, verse 26, Jesus says, "Now about the dead rising, have you not read in the book of Moses?" Right there, he talks about Moses, and he says, in the account of the burning bush, how God said, "I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." So Jesus, right there, says, this is Moses' books. You can read from Paul. Paul talks about in Romans 10:5 the righteousness that Moses describes in Leviticus. Paul, therefore, says Moses wrote Leviticus. And then we have Jesus showing that Moses was the author of Exodus. Luke in the book of Acts showing that Moses wrote Deuteronomy. Paul talks about it. So you have Luke, Jesus, and Paul all affirming authorship. And so when you put all these scriptures together, when you look at everything, I believe Moses was truly the author of the first 5 books. He put them together, inspired, received from God. And so that's basically what the JEDP theory is. If you have any questions, let's talk in the discussion thread. Share with me your thoughts, and we'll dive a little bit deeper. God bless you. Have a great week.